Welcome to the virtual celebration of Dr. Marcia Morgan's newly released book, The Silenced Voice, There is Purpose in Pain, held Friday, the 18th of September, 2020. So now I'm going to start my virtual book launch for The Silenced Voice, There is Purpose in Pain. I've got less than 30 minutes for the virtual launch to begin. I'm feeling nervous, but I'm excited. I've got some really great speakers. Fitzroy Andrews will be chairing the session. You know, over 70 people have registered. I'm just really excited right now. I'm trying to stay calm and just be prepared. I've checked all my lighting, all my connections. Wish me luck. And I will share this moment with you all. You know, this has just been an amazing journey, and I'm just really pleased that, you know, many, many years ago, when I felt isolated, invisible, excluded in my place of work, you know, just that moment of just saying, God, please help me, led me on this journey. When I thought, what kind of organization am I working in? What do I want to do? You know, I want to continue with my studies. And, you know, prayer is a great thing. Having faith, staying focused, being prepared, just wanting to know what your purpose is and then being prepared to fulfill it, just stepping out in faith. If I can leave anything with my listeners and those who join me on my virtual launch, is to be inspired, stay focused, and fulfill your purpose, whatever that may be. And no matter how difficult that it is, there is purpose in pain.
That's great. We have a trailer coming up very soon.
Welcome to the virtual book launch of The Silenced Voice, There is Purpose in Pain. This evening will be chaired by Fitzroy Andrews. You will get a chance to meet some of my friends, Dr. Gil Robinson, Chelsea Thomas, and Clover Edwards. During this evening, I will share my journey of becoming an author of 2 academic books. I will give you some tips on the writing process, and hopefully you will leave with 3 key messages. The winner of the word art competition will be announced. Throughout this evening's celebration, you will have the opportunity to ask questions using the chat tool. Don't forget to buy a copy of the book. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you will enjoy this evening's celebration. We will start shortly.
Once again, I'm going to say good evening to everybody. Thanks very much for being here. Just in case you were in any doubt, this is the launch for The Silent Voice, which is this book here. Part of the object of the exercise, apart from hearing from the book, is that we would encourage you to purchase a copy if you haven't already. And it may well be that what you hear about next hour and a half or so for proceedings this evening, and I'm just going to say a couple of very brief words of introduction as to why we're here. We've got a number of guests who are going to be contributing during the course of the evening. I will introduce them as and when we come to them, but I guess it's commonplace, I guess, in this year to think about the kind of events of this year and what's happened, and there's lots that could be said. What it does, I think, is to open up a space for us to tell our stories. And over the years, I've really come to appreciate the value of those of us that are able to put our stories down in writing. Not only because it benefits us, it also benefits those that come after us. If, like you have children, they will learn directly from your experience if you're able to write it down. And what we would want as parents is that they have an easier time, if such a thing as possible, than we have had, given the journeys that we've had so far. So any one of us that takes the time and the effort to put their thoughts on paper, I think is really worthy of our acknowledgement. And so we're glad that you're here to be able to acknowledge the launch of the book this evening. And it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome the author herself, Marcia Morgan, to the conversation. Marcia, welcome.
Thank you, Fitzroy, for agreeing to chair this session. Welcome everyone to the virtual launch of the Silence Voice, There is Purpose in Pain. I hope from this session that you will take some positive tips from me and be inspired to actually become academic authors yourself, to theorize and to contribute to knowledge.
Okay. So, Marcia, we're going to have a couple of brief conversations, and then we'll be hearing from our guests. But I guess I wanted to start with, this is your second book, and some people will be content with writing one book, but you've got on to a second one. Tell us a bit about what your thinking was in writing the second book.
Well, the purpose of the second book was to help readers to actually understand what it feels like to be a Black woman and working in the prison service, but also being a practitioner-researcher and completing a doctorate. The first book was very much academic and very heavy because it was based on my actual thesis. This second book, I wanted the readers to actually understand and actually walk that journey with me at various points of my career and through my academic journey. I guess the ultimate motivation for this whole journey of completing the doctorate and then publishing not just my first book in order to get the credibility and the authenticity to say, actually, this is a piece of theory and knowledge that contributes to knowledge production, but it was really my mother, and I wanted her to be able to read my work and understand it. And that was the reason why I wrote the second book, because the first book, as she said, totally went over her head. But this book, I wanted her to be able to actually feel what I meant and understand it in language that was accessible to everyone and not just those in academia.
Yeah. And I guess in making it accessible, there is something about that storytelling. But something I found, going back 25, 26 years, I was a student at master's level. I wanted to write something which was about making sense of my experience. And one of the things that I found really challenging is that there were so few other books around that spoke in any way to the kind of experiences that I wanted to talk about. Was that something that you encountered?
Yeah, the reason why I completed the doctorate in the first place was because at the time when I was doing my master's looking at race relations in prisons, I had to rely heavily on the American perspective. There was very few books that were written from a UK perspective, especially there were no books to do with prison occupational literature that included Black women. We were just totally invisible. Secondly, when I was looking at the issues around Black feminism, intersectionality, organizational psychodynamics, again, the Black voice was missing. And that was what was the catalyst for me to actually apply to do my PhD, to actually take the time out to find a supervisor who was of my reflection, who could actually understand what it meant to be Black female working in a particular organization. That was missing. And even now, there are very few scholars in this field that looks at gender and racial issues from an organizational psychodynamic perspective.
Okay, all right. So again, all of that, if you're into understanding people's experience in the organization, that territory that you've spoken about makes a lot of sense. How did you go about making that accessible, as you say? For those particularly that haven't read the book, what is it that makes the kind of territory that you've spoken about accessible to the reader?
Well, what makes it accessible is that the focus is from the perspective of Black women as intersectional subjects, individuals who their experience, their perceptions, the way in which they're treated is from the perspective of their gender and race combined together. What you tend to find is that when there's issues around, for example, gender inequality or sexism, the focus is on white women's perspective. Again, when there's issues around race relations, the focus is always on the Black male voice. What my study has done and what my books do is actually place Black women at the center of the study, of the analysis. They are not compared to any other group. They are not othered. They are not treated as deviant or something that is different. It's their perspective as gendered and racialized individuals that makes my research and my work accessible, because any person who is a Black woman or anyone that has multiple identities that they rely on or they relate to can understand the experiences of feeling isolated, of feeling othered, as feeling deviant, because they are different to the dominant group. And the dominant group tends to be white males or white females, because a lot of our literature tends to be from that perspective.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, we're going to continue this conversation very shortly, but I'm going to go to one of our guests. But before I do that, I just want to go to something to our guests in relation to the kind of interaction that we want. As I said, we've got a number of guests that we're going to be hearing from alongside the conversation that I'll be having with Marcia. And then we'll have a space to around about 9 o'clock, where we'll throw it open to a kind of a Q&A. Now, what you might want to do in the meantime is to post any questions or comments that you have into the chat. What I will do is to keep an eye on that, and it may be that then there are some questions that I can pick up on, so that by the time that we get there, we've got some material that we can go with, and by all means, anybody that wants to unmute their mic and come on camera and then ask a question either to Marcia or to any one of our guests that you're about to hear from, then you can do that as well. So that's a little about how we'll make things work. So by all means, it may be that something occurs to you while somebody's speaking, then make a note of that in the chat at that time, because it may be that a little later on it's kind of passed out of your minds. So that's hopefully how we'll make things work, and it will give us some material to talk about when we go to the Q&A session. So at this point, I'm going to go to the first of our guests, and clearly our guest, or two of our guests, are infinitely smarter than we are, because they are coming to us live and direct from Jamaica. So clearly there's something that we need to be learning so that we can conduct our conversations like these from Jamaica. But it's my pleasure right now to introduce Dr. Gil Robinson, who's coming to us from Jamaica. Gil, over to you.
Thank you, Fitzroy. I just want to congratulate Dr. Marcia on the publication of the second book, and to say that her experience and our experience generally, especially life in England, life in America as Black people, we share the experience of being visible and invisible. So I congratulate her, and I think her work is phenomenal. It's inspirational. And when I was asked to basically write the preface for the book, I was honored to do so. So I'm going to read that preface now. In the silenced voice, there is purpose in pain. Dr. Marcia Morgan narrates her story. She is no longer silenced, yet the pain she experienced can be clearly felt. Her book represents her journey through the hazardous terrain of two UK organizations, her place of work and her place of study. The story is succinctly told. She is now able to breathe as the consequences of what could be are no longer possibilities and or probabilities. However, at the start of her journey, similarly to many other women of color's experience, whiteness with its knee on her neck silenced her voice, if only for a period of time. But for her, at that juncture, the consequences of breaking the silence was just not possible to contemplate. The racism, the working twice as hard to achieve the same as her white women colleagues, the impossibility of achieving like her white male colleagues, the stereotypes, the microaggressions were all too hegemonic. What opportunity can there be for her? Please, let's not speak out of turn. How dare her even think about equality of opportunity? Such practices in these ivory towers of HMPPS and UK universities are but symbolism and are only for whiteness. How is she able to maneuver in these shark-infested waters, the place she calls work? Her resilience as a woman of color kicks in. That is the notion of the strong Black woman, as she fights to remove whiteness knees from her neck, just so that she is able to breathe. Instead, the space invader that she is must show that beyond reasonable doubt that in HMPPS, she is here to stay and to prove she is more than capable. Moreover, at university, the ability to add to knowledge shall be unquestionable, and most importantly, to remove whiteness knees from off her neck. Remember the careers advisors in school? Oh, the factory awaits you, my dear. If you are lucky, secretarial work may just be attainable. Early thoughts of a bachelor's degree, never mind a PhD, made it seem like conquering Mount Everest may just have been easier. These negative experiences of her schooling initially silenced her thoughts of higher education. After all, UK universities are spaces of elitism and bastions of Eurocentrism. And those who work in such spaces continue to question people of color's ability to contribute to the production of knowledge. The behavior of these elites all but strangles the voice as the knee on her neck squeezes the breath from her body. But you deny me and other people of color at your peril. So she fights with every bit of her energy to change the bigotry that is the epitome of whiteness. Yeah. Because I belong, I will achieve my desires and I will be successful. Her strength and willingness to overcome. It's okay, those are my dogs just barking in the background.
Okay, I was wondering.
They have a saying in Jamaica that when the dogs go like that, they've seen the spirits. So
Okay.
they just have to go. I don't know what prompts that.
Gotcha.
Her strength and her willingness to overcome the advisory of university and HMPPS structures and institutionalized racist practices is evident. However, her gender and her race becomes hazard as whiteness continues to be blinded by stereotypes and prejudices about Black women, instead of judgment, not by the color of her skin, but by the contents of her mind. Even though it is obvious that her intellectual capacity and her clear thinking is in abundance, and is there for all who wish to see. Therefore, the struggle to overcome and have a voice continues, as it is being hindered by whiteness, wished to ensure that her kind should not matter, but her Black life matters. And so her purpose to be who she wishes to be becomes unstoppable. However, her pain can still be felt and heard as whiteness knees on her neck attempts to strangle the voice. However, her voice will not be silenced. She has now told the story of the lived experiences of a Black woman and how she navigated the complex terrain of those institutions while being invisible and visible. Now the silenced voice, there's purpose in pain, is here for you to read, because I have crossed an ocean, I have lost my tongue, from the root of the old one, a new one has sprung. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Gil. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about you and what you do as well. So if you're staying with us for the rest of the conversation, perhaps when we get to the Q&A, it'll be interesting a little bit to hear a little bit more from you. But thanks for your contribution thus far. Okay, I'm going to go back to Marcia now, and actually I'm going to mention the kind of the subtitle of the book, there is purpose in pain. Just say a bit more about that, and unravel that for us. What does that mean for you, and how does that come out in the subject matter of the book?
Well, when I first decided to go to college and do A levels, my careers officer told me that I wasn't academic enough to go to college.
Okay.
When I decided to do my doctorate, one of my referees had completed a reference to my supervisor and had told her that she didn't feel that I was an ideal PhD candidate. When I applied to work for the prison service, I was told that the prison service doesn't employ Black people, so I'd never get a job in there. So every time I've tried to do something, I've always been told that I couldn't do it or I was not good enough. And then even during those journeys when I was doing stuff, there was the challenges of life. I was a single mother raising a young Black male. I was working, studying. So all of that sort of challenges and barriers and difficulties at times was quite painful. But because I believed that I had a purpose and I was determined to fulfill that purpose, I was prepared to go through that pain in order to achieve what I wanted to achieve. That's where that tagline comes from, because in the end of it, I was able to go college and do A levels, be the first in my family to go to university, to be the first in my family to work for the prison service, to be the first to have a doctorate, to be the first to publish books. So there was purpose in all that pain that I'd gone through, and I just thought it was just so poignant to go with the book, especially when I can remember wanting to start the doctorate in the first place and being told, well, you can't just focus on Black women. You have to do some kind of comparative study where you're comparing Black women to white women, because there's just not enough Black women working in the prison service, and it's going to provide a skewed version of prison occupational literature. And then I had to challenge that and say, well, you can't compare Black women to any other group, because there's no other group that has gender and race at the same time. So even through the whole journey of the PhD from secondary school up until now, I've always been having to challenge people and views and stuff in order to actually stick with what I want to do and achieve the goal that I've been working towards.
Okay. I mean, that strikes me as potentially it's a revolutionary kind of message, because many of us will recognize that pain. Many of us have had the experiences that you've spoken about of being told that you can't do something, and when you unravel that, it's nothing more than a piece of prejudice. What can happen is that sometimes that feeling stays with us, and there's a point at which it acts as a kind of a blockage. What I'm hearing you say is that actually you use it as fuel. You use it as something that kind of drives you on some more. Would that be another way of saying what you said?
Yeah. Whenever someone tells me I can't do something, I always find a way to do it, because I think from the moment you pray about it and you have faith, it happens. And that's always, if I ask for it, it will happen, because I believe it will happen, especially when it's to help and support other people. And I think as a Black woman, my story, my journey is important. It's not more important than anyone else's, but it's important, and it's been missing.
Yeah.
And it was important that we have a stage that we can actually say our experience is unique to us because of our gender racialization.
Yeah. And particularly this year again, because of Black Lives Matter, not that Black Lives Matter only happened this year, it's been around as a movement for some time. And that's put a necessary and appropriate focus on structures and processes and decisions that happen in society and in organizations. And that's an important conversation to happen. There's an equally important parallel conversation about our agency. And that requires us, I think, to engage with exactly what you're talking about here, recognizing that pain that we might feel, but also finding ways, and this is where the importance of your book seems to me is central. How do you navigate around that pain such that you can realize your purpose? Because your purpose is there. We all have that, I would say, that responsibility to ourselves to find ways of realizing that. So what you're offering to us, I guess, is almost a kind of a route map. This is how you've done it. And people can learn from the experience that you've had. Again, does that resonate with you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I can remember seeing one of the things I always gravitate to positive role models. And my first positive role model was my grandmother, because she always said to me, if you put your mind to anything, you can do it. And that's always been my philosophy. If I put my mind to it, it can be done, regardless of the challenges that you may face. Just stay focused and you can achieve it. And that's always been my aim, to sort of be that role model, just like my grandmother was a role model to me, to actually be a role model to others, to say, yeah, it might be difficult. You may want to do a particular type of qualification and someone saying you can't, but find a way, because there is always a way. It might take a bit longer, but there's always a way.
Okay, got a message in the chat from Anthony, who is just affirming that you are indeed a role model, Marcia. So just thought I would pass that on. Okay, the other thing I want to talk about now in this section, and it's a significant feature of the book. So again, for those that haven't read it, this is one of the things I think that commends it, is how you use poetry. And the thing that really strikes me is the poetry allows you to get to that depth of feeling that I certainly recognize, you clearly recognize from what you've spoken about, in a way that if you write about it in ordinary prose, somehow it feels kind of dry and it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter, whereas expressing it in poetry in the way that you've done it, and it's a regular feature of the book. Just say a bit more about what influenced the choice of using poetry as a feature in the book.
Well, the reason why I used poetry was because when I was doing my doctorate and interviewing some of the Black women, their stories I found quite painful, because I was able to resonate with some of their experiences. And I can remember interviewing one of my participants and sitting in the car afterwards and just crying, because it was just so painful. And in that particular interview, she was talking about the fact that she felt she was the first Black woman working in her prison, and she just felt like she was a sellout. And that just resonated with me, because I've gone through those experiences where people say, how can you work for the prison service as a Black woman when you know what's happening to people there? And I just wrote that first poem. And then actually, when I wrote the poem called You're a Sellout, I just felt as though that pain was just coming out in the words.
Okay.
And when I then was at the process of writing the actual thesis, and I realized I have a chapter that looks at my reflections of being a practitioner-researcher, and I was saying to my supervisor that I need to be able to express what it's like to not just actually complete a piece of research, but to actually be part of that journey, because the women that I was interviewing were a reflection of who I was. And for me to then deny who I was in that particular space would not give it justice. So even though usually when you have a thesis, it's just usually the title and the information, I had poetry at the beginning of each and every one of my chapters. And that was my voice. That was, I'm the person that's gathering the data. I'm the person who's analyzing it. And it needs to be expressed through that journey. The reason why I include poetry in the book is because when we're talking about gender and race, very often people step back and try and think about it logically. What the poems does is bring that emotional element into it, the feelings. It's not, I'm just a Black woman, but this is how I feel as a Black woman. And this is how you feel towards me when you're reading it, regardless of whether you're of my reflection or not. You will have some sort of emotional connection to those poems, which I don't think you would get if I was using, I guess, the normal types of prose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a poem, I think it's chapter 13, towards the end of the book, where the poem is really, you're articulating some of the thoughts that you have that occur when you encounter people in your everyday reality, and almost like the mask that you put on yourself in order to navigate that reality. I mean, that just struck me as really powerful. Again, it just reminded me of some of the stuff that I remember covering when I was looking at similar territory 25 years ago. I wasn't anything as creative in terms of using poetry as well. But that just really demonstrated what you just said. Just the power of that. Using a different device to express some of that depth of feeling, rather than just trying to describe it in what you might call relatively dry prose.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to take a pause in our conversation again. And this time I'm going to go to the second of our guests, who unfortunately isn't in Jamaica, but is in somewhere a little more prosaic, which is sunny Manchester, because Manchester is always sunny, isn't it?
It
And I'd like to welcome Chelsea Thomas to our conversation at this stage, who is a criminal solicitor associate and a lecturer at the Open University. And yeah, Chelsea, over to you.
Hi. Criminal solicitor for 20 years. I have done entertainment law as well. I'm a lecturer at the OU and temporary lecturer at MMU. And I'm also finally, after 20 years, started a master's, mainly because Dr. Marcia Morgan has completed a PhD and she really enjoyed it. And that, if Marcia could do it with all the stresses and strains of work, then there's no reason why I couldn't do it. So yeah, very, very busy. I'm mixed parentage, so I have a different story. And certainly, if I can say in the beginning, things were, I suppose, a little bit easier. I didn't have as many barriers in terms of what I could achieve. Those barriers came a little bit later. So I have read one of Dr. Marcia Morgan's articles. That was extremely difficult. Haven't tried to challenge her book. That would just literally go right over my head.
Okay.
Wouldn't be able to get anywhere. But I have read the second book. The second book is a lot more accessible.
Okay, so tell us one or two of the things that you've maybe taken from the book. You've completed it, or you're still going through it?
I've completed it.
Completed it. Okay, I don't know what you're finding. In reading it, I'm finding I read it and I think, actually, I need to go back to that again because I need to get underneath of that some more. It's not that I don't understand it, but there's a kind of a depth to it that I'm finding. I don't know whether that was your experience.
My first reaction was I realised that I've really, really missed poetry. It was almost like a guttural reaction that I've missed poetry so much. Second thing I found was I've read it once. I do need to go back and read it. I've got post-its all over the book and I've highlighted bits. Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to deface your book, but I have. Because
you own it, you can do what you like with it.
I know, but there's so many bits of the book that resonate.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there's certain things that I will never verbalize to anyone, no one at all. And Marcia's touched on those. So she's not only verbalized it in terms of her experience, but she's explained it in a psychological way that I understand. And then given a tip in terms of how to address that. How do you deal with that in a workplace? Or how do you deal with those issues in terms of higher education? So I've really, really enjoyed the book. And the poetry is, you're absolutely spot. So yeah, so it feels like some of my experiences have been verbalized. I can actually kind of go and acknowledge it. So yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. There's a question in the chat which I'm going to put to you from Margaret, and she's asking you to say which article you read that moved you, that was written by Dr. Marcia.
Right. So, fourth chapter, the poem "This Is Not For Me."
Okay.
And I'm a new researcher, very new. So it's kind of, I'm middle-aged, but I'm a new researcher. So it's a whole new world to me. But I'm also a lecturer. Fine at the Open University, but MMU, it's an established institution and it's academics. And I'm more of a practical, hands-on, deal with crime instead of explaining it. So this poem to me, so even the first stanza, the academic world is not for me. I can't imagine how it would feel to associate with scholars, educationalists, and the elite. I wonder how it will be. It just literally kind of explained exactly how I was feeling in the first stanza. So the rest of the poem goes on, and it deals with the anxieties that arise from it. But what I find really useful is that there's practical tips in terms of how to deal with certain issues.
Okay. Chelsea, thank you so much for your contribution. Do stay with us, because I suspect that there may be others who will have some questions for you. So thanks for your contribution so far. I'm just going to go back to the chat, because there's a couple of people in here that I want to reference. There's a comment here from Mindy Gibbons Klein. Now, I have heard of Mindy, although we've not met. She is known as the book midwife. I think I'm right in saying, I just checked that online, so I think I'm right in saying that. And Mindy's thing is getting people to write that book that is within them. So if you are here today and you're inspired by what you're hearing from Marcia and from our guests, and it's the next step, then one option that you have is maybe to look at what Mindy offers in terms of the support. Now, I think the offer includes being part of a group where you get some mutual support in writing your book as well. But I just wanted to acknowledge Mindy for being here, because her reputation is worldwide. I've certainly heard of her long before being here today. So it's great that you're here. And I just wanted to give you that acknowledgement for being here as well. So you may want to say something a bit later on when we go to the Q&A, but just to acknowledge you for now. Comment here from Dominic Pinnock, which says, I'm so proud to have seen your development, Marcia. You're a strong role model and an inspiration.
Thank you.
Okay, Marcia, perhaps if we go back to our conversation now, and actually I want to pick up the point that I was making in relation to Mindy. Did you work with Mindy in putting this book together?
Yeah, Mindy was, I guess, the CEO of Panorama Press, and they're my publishers for this book. So yes, I have worked closely with Mindy and her team, and I would strongly recommend them. She's been excellent. Her team has been excellent. They've been efficient. They've been really supportive, even with the title, in sort of bouncing ideas of the title, bouncing ideas about what the cover would look like.
Yeah.
Even just like the color of the pages, they were excellent. Okay. I mean, Mindy, if you'd like to say something about.
Well, she just put a message to say that she needs to drop off the call, but she's wishing you heaps of luck and success. And again, if you look for the book midwife online, then you will find her details. And I say her reputation is legendary, so
thank you.
highly recommended. So,
thank you. Just wanted to say thanks, Marcia. Good luck, congratulations, and this is a phenomenal event. You guys, this is better than a live event. Well done, and I'll see you all online.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks a lot, Mindy. Okay, so you heard from her live and direct there. So Marcia, let's go back to this business of being a writer. Do you think of yourself as a writer?
I'm still getting used to that title.
Okay.
I see myself as Marcia Morgan, and I'm still getting used to the fact that I'm Dr. Marcia Morgan. So I don't see myself as a writer. I see myself as someone who shares my experience, shares my ideas through writing, because that's the way in which you can get to more people. So when I'm writing, I don't think when I'm a writer, I'm going to write something. I do it in a means to express myself. I can remember when I was younger being told that I'm quite litigious in the way, if I've got a complaint, I'm writing that complaint. Okay. And I guess I take that same attitude to writing my book, to writing my articles. If I've got something to say, I will say it using the pen and paper or the keyboard. But I don't see myself as a writer.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, 2 books in, because I mean, I've had this ambition for a long time. So a lot of what I'm saying, I'm not only saying to people out there, I'm saying it to me as well as additional motivation. How do you start? And where do you start?
You start
other than at the beginning, yes.
You start by, if you're a writer, as in the traditional sense of pen and paper, you get a piece of paper, you get a pen, and you write. Whatever comes to mind, you start writing. Okay. If you prefer the keyboard, you start typing. I never start from the beginning. I start from whatever's on my mind or in my heart at that time. And I just write it. Right. So sometimes when I write stuff, I can sort of start in the middle. and then go to the beginning and then the end. I don't do the introduction, title. I just start writing and then it just comes together.
Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I must admit, now that, as you said that, I've heard that kind of thing before. Rather than trying to, and certainly I've done this, rather than trying to think of, as you say, the title or the structure or the chapters, it's very much about whatever you need to express, get that out. And once you start doing that, the process will develop its own momentum. And you will find the structure and the title and the messages once you start to get into the process of writing. Okay. I will guess, though, that there is some, once you get to a certain point, there is a process of decision-making about structure and organization and so on as well. Where does, in your experience, where does that come? That
comes after you've read your first bit of writing.
Okay.
Because as you're reading your stuff, you'll think, well, actually, that needs to go at the beginning, or that needs to go in the middle, or that needs to go in the end. If you've got, depending on, so at the moment, I'm writing a piece for the Black History Month magazine. And I decided that, well, actually, in my research, I met a lady that started working in the 80s. And then we had a conversation, and I've just thought, well, actually, this is Dear My Sister, because you're a Black woman who was in the organization, and you were there sort of 30 years ago. I'm here now. Has things changed? And it's just writing our conversation out. Then I'll go back and I'll read through it and think, well, actually, obviously you need an introduction, but once you know the meat of what you're going to write about, then you can then decide to introduce it, because the 3 rules of writing is introduction, main body, and summarize what you've said.
Okay. So it's the old public speaking rule. Say what you're going to say it, say what you've just said kind of thing. It's a bit like that, but in writing rather than in speech. Okay, just quickly going to the chat. John Lynch has said, privileged to be here and to listen to Marcia and others. So many points that touch a chord. Has to leave the event, but look forward to reading the book. So thanks for being here, John. Really appreciate it. Better than watching Coronation Street, I'm sure. So yeah, get that book and, you know, put some, I mean, it's available. We'll get about where you can get the book. I mean, like the ideal thing, I guess, is to go directly to you to actually get the book, because essentially actually let's develop that point. How has the book been published? I mean, Mindy has worked with you as a publisher. Does that mean that she publishes it through her imprint, or is there an element of self-publishing involved? How does that work?
No, it's printed through Panoma Press. And so there's copies that I sell direct, and then copies are also sold via Amazon. And then there's various links which I've actually put in the chat. At the moment, there is a special offer for the first week up until the 23rd. So for those who have eBooks, you're able to get an ebook version for 99p. Amazon's always got a discount as well for the paperback, which is $10.99. So through Mindy, you're able to publish ebook versions, paperback, and plus I get copies as well, where I'm also able to sell directly to individuals, especially for those who don't like to use Amazon.
Yes, and yeah, we have to acknowledge that. Yeah, there are some issues around Amazon, shall we say? But let's keep the politics, or that kind of politics, out of the conversation, at least for tonight. Okay, that's great. And you know, just to, no, I think it actually is worth talking about. There is a business and the process of selling books. You know, that's partly, let's be clear, that's partly why we're doing tonight. But it's not that the selling and trying to make money of it is the purpose, but there is something, I guess, about putting the word about so that people will hear about your book, buy it, and get some value from it. But the value is not about the money that you make, presumably. It's more about, are people able to move their own lives on and accomplish what they want to in their lives through being influenced in some way by what you've written?
Well, yeah, because so for example, my first publication, because that was an academic book, it was very expensive for individuals to buy. Yeah. But I had to go through that process in order to get the credibility as an academic researcher. So it was important that I had to go through that. I had to obviously make a financial contribution to the publication of that book. And I accept that because that book is so expensive, it's not as accessible as I would hope. With the second book, again, for me, it wasn't about making money from it. The second, because if it was about making money, I would have just focused on the first publication and just get that specifically in colleges and libraries and get people to buy it. I understand what it means to have to decide what you spend your money on. Hence the reason why with the second book, it was really important that it was accessible financially to the readers. Also, one of the things that I always encourage people to do is to, if they're studying, to get their libraries to buy copies, because a lot of people don't realize that if you request a particular book for your library, they will purchase it. And then again, it's widely available to other individuals. The purpose of me writing these 2 books wasn't to make money from it. It was to make Black women visible in prison occupational literature, because we're missing. And when I was reading stuff about prison work, there was nothing about me. And it was important for the next generation, I believe, to be able to... The conversation continues in part 2. For those who's staying on, it would be nice if everyone could turn their cameras on and I could take
That sounds good to me.
Everyone.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Let's go to gallery view so we can maybe see who there is out there.
My hair.
Don't worry about your hair. You're here.
I'm like,
it's not about your hair. It's about being here.
I was home.
Don't worry about that. You could be in your pajamas for all I care. No business.
No, you didn't want to see that.
Okay, are we ready?
All right, we've still got 30 odd people on the call, which is great. This is much better Friday evening entertainment. I mean, I don't need to lead things anymore necessarily. I think if anybody wants to take the conversation in a certain direction, I mean, we've rocked some serious science on here this evening, so there's lots to talk about, it seems. So whichever way you want to develop it, really.
Yeah.